Well, thank you everybody for having me back. Thank you for having me back. It's fun to see some familiar names and faces.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kate. I'm just going to read your biography for anybody who doesn't know who you are, which is nobody. But anyways, Kate Quinn is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of historical fiction. A native of Southern California, she attended Boston University, where she earned a bachelor's and master's degree in classical voice. She's written 4 novels in the Empress of Rome saga and 2 books in the Italian Renaissance before turning to the 20th century with the Alice Network, The Huntress, The Rose Code, The Diamond Eye, and The Briar Club. She's also a co-author in several collaborative novels, including The Phoenix Crown and Ribbons of Scarlet. All have been translated into multiple languages, and Kate and her husband now live in Maryland with 3 rescue dogs.
Amazing. You may see the dogs wandering past in the background. There's a tail. I figure nobody will mind.
I think everybody's pretty used to that. That's pretty standard. If you don't have a screaming child in the background, then I think you're ahead of the game. All right, so I do have so many questions for you. Of course, you've written so much since we talked last time about the Alice Network. So I'd love to cover all the things. We are not going to be doing any spoilers for the Briar Club. So anybody who hasn't read it will be able to pick that up after this. And we'll certainly, actually, you know what, let's kick that off with, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Briar Club? What can we expect from your new novel?
The Briar Club just released in July, and it is, in a nutshell, the story of a group of very different women who all live in an all-female boarding house in early 1950s Washington, D.C. And this is the era of McCarthy, the Red Scare, the Cold War, all of that, very gristy, darkness that is rippling underneath the surface of, the very placid 1950s calm that is settling in between the war-torn 40s and then, the civil rights racked 50s or 60s, which are about to come. These women really have nothing in common but an address until a new boarder comes to live in the attic room at the very top of the house, and she begins to draw her neighbors together, first with a weekly supper club, and then with just the bonds that tie them all and make them realize that they have more to offer each other than just and just squabbles over who gets the bathroom next. And however, all of these women have secrets to hide. And on one very fateful Thanksgiving day in 1954, one of those secrets is going to come home to roost, and the blood is quite literally going to hit the walls, and the women are going to have to decide who is the true enemy in their midst.
Well, if you're not hooked yet, then I can't believe it, because that sounds fabulous, of course. Your books span historical periods with such richness. What initially drew you to the writing historical fiction? And is there a particular era you still dream of exploring in future works?
Oh, that's a good one. I can't really remember a time I wasn't interested in the past, and that's because I was really lucky enough to have a mom who was not only a librarian but had a degree in ancient and medieval history. So I was learning tidbits about the past in the same sort of casual, fun way that kids my age were learning about Saturday morning cartoons. And so when I started writing my own books, or my own stories, I just started to gravitate automatically towards the stories of the past. And it's a fascination that I've never really given up. I do think it is the best thing that we have, at least until someone invents a TARDIS, to time travel. Good historical fiction really can immerse you in the past in the most wonderful way. And that's why I love it. As far as an era that I haven't explored yet, oh goodness, there are many. I am fascinated not just by historical eras, because people have asked me, you've written in such different historical eras, wild and jumping, and it's like, what I'm really, I think, fascinated by is the way that women of the past have found ways, even while being marginalized, to contribute to huge historical events and still to make their mark, even if they don't get credit for it. And I'm also fascinated by the way that women have found ways to carve out these little spheres of influence and independence when they live in eras that do not want them to have it. And the thing is, for women like all of that, you can find them in any historical era, which is why I have done a fair amount of jumping around, because I'm always finding a new woman or women who have done something so amazing that I just think I have to write about that. How did I not know about more about this? As for a period I'd love to write, I don't know if I ever will write it, but really one of my very first loves as a kid was Elizabeth I and Tudor England, and that's because Elizabeth I was my role model growing up. She was it, man. I wanted to be her, minus the really bad childhood, but it's like the monarch, the queen, the one who bossed everything and had a golden age. I loved her. I adored her, and I still do. I don't know if I will ever write about that period because there has been so much written about Elizabeth I and the Tudor court that I don't know what I would have that would be new to bring to the table. So that's one of those things that, like, maybe I'll write about it, or maybe I'll just read a lot of the fabulous fiction that's already been written about it and call it a day. We'll see.
I love that. That it feels like it's come full circle, because you had this mother that was sort of like this, like who kind of sparked your interest in it initially, and now the way that you read or write your books, are you're like going across history and finding these women that are kind of like your mother, actually.
She is still my first reader for anything that I write, and she's a great reader too. She's a huge reader of fiction on her own. She has a very unerring eye for pacing and for characters. So I give my stuff to her, and I know she's going to improve it. She gives it back with great notes. So for people who say, like, well, you never give stuff to your mom unless you just want to be praised, not my mom. My mom is a great critique partner, and I don't mean that she's mean. She's actually a lovely critique partner, but she will absolutely tell me, it's like, your pace is flagging here, pick it up. And I know she's right.
Oh, well, that's such a nice relationship to have. Ladies, just want to reiterate, if you do want to ask a question live, then we really, really do welcome that. It's always fun to have a question from the audience. This is your chance. And if you want to ask a question in the chat window, then please feel free to put those in there, and I'll make sure that they are asked. And you know what? Why not, Joanne? Let's go.
You know me, I love to jump in. What music do you like to listen to while you're writing?
I need music to write, so I always have something on in the background, and it depends on the era of the book I'm writing. I tend to go for stuff that will help me immerse in the period a little bit more. So when I was writing the Briar Club, it was a lot of like 1950s music, a lot of doo-wop, a lot of rockabilly, a lot of Elvis, like a lot of the stuff that really immersed me. And I will note too, for anybody, for my last 4 books, I think I have Spotify playlists that are public. So with all the music that is actually mentioned in the book. So if you want a soundtrack for the Diamond Eye, the Rose Code, the Phoenix Crown, or the Briar Club, and I will drop those links in the side for you. I also have them posted on Instagram. But like for the Briar Club, it was a lot of 50s music. It was a lot of opera when I was writing the Phoenix Crown, because that was about an opera singer. I remember for the Alice Network, I was listening to a lot of Edith Piaf and a lot of this French jazz, and that was very strange cognitively, because it had me thinking, it's like, it is 9 a.m. Why do I want a scotch and a cigarette? And I don't even smoke. But it's like Edith Piaf. It's that nightclub thing. It's like all of a sudden it's like, I want an unfiltered cigarette and a scotch, and I don't care what time of day it is. It's Edith. I blame her. So it depends on the book that I'm writing, but I always do like, sort of tailoring my music depending on what it is that I'm actually writing, depending on the historical period.
I was just going to say that Jo must have done her research, because that's not a question I would ask an author normally, but she hit the nail on the head there. All right. From the Alice Network to Rose Code and now the Briar Club, your characters are often resilient women in difficult circumstances. Where do you find inspiration for these complex, multi-layer female protagonists?
Well, it really comes from history itself. I mean, because it is it's not that these women don't exist. It's just that you kind of have to dig around the edges a little bit to find them of history. The spotlight of history does tend to focus mainly on, the winners, as it always does. And, the winners tend to be mostly white European men. And it's the kind of thing where, though, if you dig around, look in the footnotes, look in the edges, you will find women contributing even to, huge, massively important historical events. So I tend to look for that. And, I go down those rabbit holes as soon as I do find them. And then, that's where I find great ladies and to write about. And I often, joke that, and it's not really even a joke, that, when I find women to write about, I want to find, ladies who have done something so cool and courageous and awe-inspiring that my jaw just hits the floor. And that usually is the moment of inspiration for me for any book, will be when I run across either a group of women or a woman who has done something so extraordinary that my whole brain lights up. And I just end up thinking, wow, I could hang a story on that.
Fair enough. We do have a question here. Well, it's not really a question, but Tammy says, for anyone who hasn't read Briar Club yet, she highly recommends the audiobook, particularly the chat between Kate and the audiobook narrator at the end. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a little special that we ended up doing as an exclusive for the audiobook version of the Briar Club. And it's a three-way chat between my editor, my audio narrator, Saskia Marlebelt, and me. And I love Saskia. I've had her since the Alice Network, and she did such a sensational job on that. I did have a small part in picking her, at least casting my vote for her. They gave me audio clips of two narrators they were considering and said, do you have a preference? And I listened to both. They were both great, but there was a quality in Saskia's voice I really liked, and I cast my vote for her. And she did such a great job with the Alice Network. She was nominated for an Audie, which is the Audible Book Award equivalent of the Oscars, for Best Female Narrator for that book. And she's going up against, I don't think she won. She was going up against, like Rachel McAdams, narrating a new version of, Anne of Green Gables, that kind of thing. But she did such a great job. I've requested her ever since. And I email her, as soon as I'm done with the book, and it's like, please tell me you could squeeze this in. And how's your Russian accent, by the way? Things like that. And she's never let me down since. So I really had fun chatting with her, because especially for the Briar Club, I thought from the beginning that I was just worried. It's like, I'm going to kill Saskia. There's like 9 different points of view in this book, and how is she going to differentiate them all? That is a lot. It's a big cast. So even from the beginning of the book, while I was writing, I ended up thinking, I better be giving her some help here if I want this audiobook to succeed. So it actually affected the writing and the plotting of the book somewhat, because it had me giving my characters backgrounds that would affect the quality of their voices. It's like, okay, I'm gonna, the mean girl in this book is, I was just planning to have her be, a standard mean girl, but I'm gonna make her come from Texas so she can have a little bit of that, Texas drawl in her voice, the flat twang. And, the other, she's Irish, she could have just a hint of a brogue here and there, just a lilt up here and there. And it's like, and then I have another character who is, an immigrant from Berlin, and it's like, okay, she could definitely have a bit of German in her voice. So I did my best to give Saskia some help so that she wouldn't be completely stuck with, having to voice 8 different women and trying to make them all different when they all just sound flat American.
That's amazing though, for and that comes with experience, right? Because I don't think an author ever sets out to be like, okay, this is going to be into an audiobook. I really need to take that into consideration. So, go ahead if you want. No.
Do we have another question?
No, it wasn't a question. It wasn't a question. I just thought you were going to say something. My next question really is about what changed when you wrote the Alice Network, because the books before were all series. Was it like a pivotal moment in your life, or did something change when you wrote the Alice Network in your career?
Mainly what changed is that I had a book I wanted to write, and it was another Italian Renaissance novel, and we pitched it and nobody wanted it. It was just basically people said, I'm sorry, the Italian Renaissance just isn't selling. So my agent had said, have you considered writing something a little more forward in time, something a little more recent? And I took a look around and I was starting to see this boom that was really just beginning of 20th century women's war fiction. And also, since this was about late 2015, late 2014, early 2015, like literally it's about 10 years ago now, that's when I was seeing all of these pieces online about various 100-year anniversaries for World War One.
Right.
So that was what made me think about World War One specifically. And then, I literally thought, all right, what are women doing in World War One besides like Red Cross nurses? What else are they doing? And I came across a book just literally titled Women Heroes of World War One. And in there was the story of the original and real Alice Network, and that did that thing for me. It lit up the light bulb and made me think, wow, I didn't know anything about this. I could definitely write about this. And so, that is what sort of tipped me onto writing about the 20th century. It was my first attempt at a dual timeline as well. And that was the book that got picked for a Reese Witherspoon book club pick. It was only her second pick. She was just getting the book club off the ground. So I felt, that really kind of solidified that it was like, wow, this is going to be something different. And feeling very grateful to have had that opportunity.
That's so
By the way,
exciting.
I did put in the chat on the side, there are all the links for my various
Amazing.
Spotify playlists if you'd like to have them.
Amazing. I did want to ask, just sort of based on your answer to the last question about process, how much, and I think that everybody here would be interested in this, but I don't know, how much does sort of like your publishing house, or whether it's your editor or whoever, say like, what we really need, what everybody's really looking for is something written about this or about X. You really notice it in movies, right? Like all of a sudden there's like this huge like influx of movies about like older women dating younger men. And so I wonder how much that plays in the publishing world.
Really get that from my publisher. It's like, will you please write about blank? It's more like, we would love to have something in the vein of your last book, or like in the vein of, can you write something else to follow up the Alice Network? So like I had the sense, I remember after that, it would be like, they really would wanted to see something else that was along the same lines of like women in wartime and 20th century. I think if I tried then to go back to that, like say Italian Renaissance idea, they would have been like, I know we really like that, but we'd really like to have something more in this vein. So, but they don't give me instructions as far as it has to be something here or that falls between here and here, and it has to do with blank. I don't get that. My editor actually knows me well enough. I have the last few books basically pitched her on, it's like I'll have, I'll have an outline, a brief outline, and, some back cover copy. I can, like a synopsis of the story that I want to tell. And then we'll usually get on the phone and I'll chat with her a bit more about, it's like, okay, this is what I have in mind in a more detailed way. Sometimes what I've done, or what I do with my agent, is that I will send her, 2 or 3 ideas, and she will, take a look, and she'll just end up thinking, all right, why don't we pitch these 2 to your editor? I think you can put this one aside, maybe that one, save that one for later. I'm not sure, given the zeitgeist, that's the right story idea for now. And, my agent's very smart. I tend to listen to her. So then, we might give my editor, a few things to pick from, or maybe just one if I'm really confident that this is it. Although sometimes if you end up giving them a choice, they'll pick one that you didn't anticipate. I remember I had 3 book ideas when I pitched after The Diamond Eye. One was the book idea about the San Francisco earthquake, which eventually I reshaped as a collaborative with my friend Janie Chang, and that got written further down the road. One was a book idea about the suffragettes in Britain and the women's right to vote. And one was a book idea about the women code breakers of Bletchley Park. And I didn't honestly think they would pick the Bletchley Park book. I thought it was going to be one of the other ones, but they did. And I was like, okay, I can do code breakers. This will be fine. And just because, you don't end up writing one story idea, it doesn't mean that book's time won't come. I mean, as I said, the idea about the San Francisco earthquake just came out of the bed, a few years later, and it ended up, making it to print just in a slightly different form. But I think it made it to print in a better form than it would have been if I'd just written it as a solo novel. So I always end up thinking that, sometimes just because you don't end up writing a book now, it doesn't mean its time won't come, because there are cycles in historical fiction, as in any fiction, as far as what people are reading.
Yeah.
When I first published my ancient Rome novels, uh, HBO's Rome was the biggest thing on HBO. That was one of the, suddenly ancient world was really hot. When I was writing about the Italian Renaissance, the Borgias was airing, I think, or it just aired on, Showtime right after the Tudors. Again, like this Renaissance era was pretty hot. But then, these things fall back out of fashion. And, then there's this huge boom in World War II fiction. For a while, it seemed like there was nothing but World War II. But
Yeah.
15 years before that, I knew writers who said you couldn't sell a World War II book to an agent for love or money. So,
Yeah.
these things come in cycles, and it is something I keep an eye on, which just looking to see, like, what are people reading? What are, bookstores buying and displaying and putting on their shelves? What do editors want? And that is something you have to keep in mind, if you're not only looking to be a writer for the joy of it, but you're also looking to be a writer and hopefully pay your electricity bill.
Very good. So while we're talking sort of about process, I would wonder if you can walk us through your writing process, and how do you typically start with an idea, and what does it take to develop that into a full nuanced story?
Well, it usually just begins, as I said, with I have found either a woman or women of the past who have done something, truly amazing. And, I think, okay, that's the hook that I'm going to hang the story on. And then after that, I go into it and I see, where are the gaps in the storyline, because, history never gives you a full set of facts. You're always going to have gaps. You're going to have questions. You do that research, you figure out where those are and how you can fill them. And then generally, I then layer the fictional elements of my story on top of the historical, timeline and facts. It's like using, like that's the skeleton, and you layer the fictional elements on top, like that's the flesh. And I do like to have a lot of fictional elements because, that gives me more freedom with the story. So often my characters are either built from, tiny snippets, about which we don't know very much. Eve from the Alice Network was just, a name with very little more in it. She was just a woman who had happened to be arrested, alongside the leader of the Alice Network and then released. And it was assumed she was just a local civilian who'd been caught in the wrong place in the wrong time. But I thought, what if? And I created a whole background for her where she was one of the spies. But, it all came from, a lot of it really came from a single name in a footnote in the account of the arrest. I've sometimes also done things like I base people very closely on historical figures, but, with perhaps a few details changed. Osla from the Rose Code was like that. She's based on the real life Osla Benning, who really was a Bletchley Park code breaker, who was Prince Philip's girlfriend during the war. And I changed just a few things about her. I hewed very close to the real Osla's life, but I changed just a few things about her because the real Osla's children are still living. And, that's their mom. And I want to make it clear that I'm making a differentiation between my version and the version who really did live. I also have quite often will just make fictionalized composites of real women. Sometimes put two real minor historical figures together and make a composite character who I can then have a little bit more freedom with. But that's how I tend to put the story together. I do a lot of outlining, a lot of that, and I do all my own research. The only time I've ever had like a research partner or something like that would be, it was for the Rose Code. I did at the very end of my writing process hire an independent researcher to fact check me, because there was so much in that book to get wrong, and her specialty was the women of Bletchley Park, and she worked with actual Bletchley Park before, writing her own works. So I knew she would help me find anything I'd gotten wrong, and she was great. But other than that, no, I tend to do my own research. The wonderful thing nowadays is so much has been digitized and made available to people online, which has been great, because I do, obviously believe that you should travel to the places that you write about if you can, but you can't always do that. I couldn't travel to Oradour-sur-Glane, which is one of the big sites of the Alice Network where a massacre happened in World War II at the time, because I couldn't afford it. Either it wasn't in the budget and it wasn't in my calendar. I didn't have the time or the money to go. So it's like I had to do my best with a lot of digitized resources online. Thank goodness there were some really great ones in terms of, photographs, maps, trial records, things like that, that had all been put together, and which gave me what I needed to write the book. So I did actually get to go to Orador Sorglin just this fall for the very first time, and I have to say that was very, very moving. But yeah, travel is great if you can do it for research. If you can't, you do your best with things that are digitized and with, accounts from history. As far as the writing process, I mean, I do a lot of outlining in advance. I try to save myself from wildly overwriting the first draft, which usually does not work, but I keep trying anyway. And I do a lot of outlining first. I try to get to know my characters as well as I can. I do a lot of thought in advance about who are they, what's their background, what are their skills and talents, what are their weaknesses, what are the things that make them feel insecure, what are their ghosts, their wounds, their soft spots. And I try to have that in place before I start writing so that I know my people as well as possible. So that's really sort of what my process is. All of that can take some months before I even start drafting. But once I draft, I try to bang out a rough draft as quick as I can. And then I go through many, many, many rounds of edits.
Joanne just has a question Jackie. Jackie has a question here that falls within process, and she wants to know the genesis of usually having multiple perspectives.
Well, I really like having multiple perspectives in a book because it can open up your book world wider. And because if you're only limited to what one person can see, that can actually really keep you limited, because then you end up with exciting things that happen off screen that then have to be narrated or told to your main character because your main character couldn't plausibly be there. And that is the kind of thing that can get very boring very quickly in historical books, where if you just see, especially with women who often are sidelined in some ways from the main action. I have read some historical novels where you just have, like, the whole novel feels like the heroine is standing in the middle of a sumptuously appointed room being told about something exciting that just happened 100 miles away. And I think that can get dull very quickly. But if you have another character who could be there, then you've opened up your world a bit, and you have shown that you can have eyes on the ground in ways that you can't when sometimes you just have one set of eyes. So I always like it for that reason. And it's also good too, so that way you can show different points of view in terms of, you have two different characters and two completely different sets of values that are making judgments on what's happening. So you can show different lenses on, different opinions on world events if you have two characters who have very different ideas about those events. So I've always liked a multiple point of view book. I don't think I've ever written a solo point of view book. Maybe the closest would be The Diamond Eye. That is almost all from just Lyudmila Pavlichenko's point of view. But even so, there's a couple others in there just for a little bit more perspective and to give that little bit of extra widening of the world.
Love that. That seems to make a lot of sense to me. Jackie says thank you. She said it's her favorite part of your writing.
Oh, thank you.
Amber, this is a great question. I feel like Amber might be a budding author. If you could go back in time, would you do anything differently before getting your first book written or published? Alternatively, what piece of advice would you give someone working on their first book?
Oh, goodness, I'm not sure. I don't know if I'd do anything differently. I think it did work out well for me, even though it felt like a very long process with a lot of rejection letters along the way. It certainly was, but I don't think necessarily that was a bad thing. I think maybe I would have learned earlier to reach out to try to find my community of writers. And that's something that I would advise people if you're getting started, is find your community, because writing is a very solitary business, and it can be very easy to get stuck inside your head. And it can be really good to have that group of writers that you can rely on. And I do have my community. I've found it every place I've lived. And I've also found it, just how do you find it? You can find it online. You can find it this is why I advise going to conferences if you can afford it, because that is where you will find your tribe. You will find a lot of other people like you with very similar enthusiasms and passions, and you'll keep touch with them. And these are the people who will keep you sane. And these are the people who can eventually evolve into critique partners, which is another great thing to find. I found, my critique partners who see my book first after my mother are all a group of fellow authors, mostly historical fiction, some in other genres, who can be counted on to help me whip my book into shape before my editor even sees it. So it's useful for that way. And also, given nowadays that everything is online and it is so much more public with social media, we've all seen the things like authors behaving badly, where some author, like blows up at a reader online over a bad review, and like that goes viral and it's really bad. And that's the kind of thing where my author friends and I will look at each other, we'll just be, that should have been a private bitch session to their author friends in a text thread. It should never have been online. It should never have been public. And that's where sometimes you do need that, private text thread with your writer friends, where you can bitch about that 2-star review that was so unfair. And then you get it out of your system and you can forget about it. And that's the people who will remind you, or when you're in your 40,000 word doldrums, it's like, shut up. You do know how to write a book. I promise. You're just hitting the saggy middle. You're going to get out of this soon. It'll be fine. So these are the people who will remind you that you really can do it. And these are the people who will keep you sane and will give you help on your manuscript, and you can give them help on theirs, and you'll all learn from each other. And so I would encourage you, any new writer, it's like, try to find your community, try to find more writers and more people who are on about the same rung of the ladder as you. You're in the same journey, in the same boat together, and you will end up lifting each other up.
I always find that it's fascinating when you speak to authors and they always, like, their best friends or other like very big authors that are also writing perhaps historical fiction or whatnot. It's always really fascinating that you guys run together. It's but it makes sense how it comes about.
Well, it's a small world, because it's like you end up being asked to blurb somebody's book, and you read it and you love it and you give it a cover quote and you exchange a few emails about it, and then at some point you end up at the same conference or the same book festival, and it's like, oh yes, we finally get to meet in person. This is great. Drinks on me. And then you have a friendship. And then after a while, it's like, hey, I'm coming into town on book tour. Like, you want to grab dinner right before my event. And it's like, you'll end up driving 50 miles just for a chance for a cup of coffee with somebody while they're coming through town for, 24 hours, because that's the only time you got. And it really is great. The friends have been some of the best part of this business. It is a small world. And I feel like, it's like we do get to know each other quite a lot of us, along the way, which is great.
Which I think is a good segue to actually writing with other people, because you do have 2 novels, most recently The Phoenix Crown, where you wrote with another author. And what's that experience like versus writing solo?
Well, I've written collaboratives in a couple different ways. My book Ribbons of Scarlet, about the women of the French Revolution, was written with an author group of 6 of us. And that was a little bit more divided up and solo, because the novel, although it goes A to Z through the experiences of the French Revolution, each section of it is from the point of view of a different woman and a real woman, and then voiced by, written by a different author. So even though we did try to have some interweaving of our women, in and out of each other's sections, it was more of a solo endeavor. You wrote your own part solo. And whereas writing with Janie Chang, that was much more intertwined from the beginning. That was a novel where, we took alternating chapters, because we knew from the beginning we had rather different writing styles. And we thought, well, we'll just keep it simpler on ourselves rather than trying to create a blended style. We will simply have, the book told from the point of view of 2 different women. And she will write all the chapters from the viewpoint of the Chinese seamstress from San Francisco named Su Ling. And I will write all the chapters from the point of view of the New York opera singer named Gemma. And so we did have, her chapters and my chapters, but even so, it was our book. And so we did a lot of outlining, very carefully, like in a spreadsheet, before we even started drafting, where, every chapter we knew, it's like, it's going to start here, it'll finish here on the timeline. We know exactly how much time it covers. We know pretty much what happens. So that way we could write somewhat independently of each other, because I could write a chapter knowing what Janie was going to write in the chapter that came before mine, even if I hadn't yet read it, because she hadn't quite finished it yet. And then we would, upload our finished chapters in, as soon as we were done drafting, into a shared Google Drive, so the other could read, and then, take what they read to, infuse their own writing, whatever it did. And whenever we had a problem, it's like, hey, I'm not really sure how we can get these women to meet more. Can we have them meet earlier in the book? How can we have them plausibly cross paths? And then we would just hop on Zoom and talk it out. And the great thing about collaborative writing is that when you have two heads, really are better than one. I mean, when you're trying to get a solution to a plot problem and you're just banging your own head against the wall, it can take a while. Whereas it felt like if Janie and I had ideas to bounce off of each other, we came up with a solution in no time. Like there was nothing in that book that we did not just, anytime we hit a snag, crowdsource a solution, we had it. And that really did make the writing process fabulous. We also just approached it with a great deal of respect, because we both know various collaborations that have resulted in maybe a finished book, but also a finished friendship. And we did not want that to happen. And thank God it did not. But we knew, knowing that from the beginning, that, the preservation of the friendship was really the first goal. We approached it with respect in the sense that, like, I always made sure it's like, are you good with this plot twist, or do we want to think about something different? If she said, like, I just don't think my character would react that way, it's like, I did not argue. It's like, that character better than I do, so it's like, okay, let's find another way to do it. I will dial it up. It's like we didn't just start overwriting, overwriting each other's, red penning each other's, words. We would just use the comment bubbles and say, I think the pace could pick up here, or I think Alice would say something different here, rather than, than just going in and making the changes for ourselves. So there was a lot of respect there, and there was a lot of care. And the result is that we had a great time writing it. And we eventually ended up on a really great time on the road, because they sent us around Canada and the US on tour together for about 3 weeks. And that was a great time, even if it was exhausting.
That's amazing. I love that. It sounds like a lot of fun.
It really was.
Ashley, this is a great question. Yeah, Kate would have a lot to weigh in on here. She says, how has social media and the rise of book talk changed your experience in the publishing world?
Oh, hugely. Social media has meant that much of the marketing of books has now started to fallen on writers, which is much to our dismay, because we tend to be introverts who want to sit in our ivory towers and just write the books. Thank you very much. But now you need to be on social media. You need to be more present. And it doesn't always come naturally. And that can be difficult. Especially with the idea that things are more visual than they used to be. Writers usually stay behind books because we don't want to be visual. I mean, you've never seen the dread that will, like, cross a writer's face by the instructions. Can you just film a little 30-second video for promo? And they'll be like, shoot me, just please. God forbid anything but having to film the 30-second promo video, which will probably take 3 hours to do right. But it is what we have to do now. There is the fact that social media gives the readers a great deal more, and the writers a great deal more access to each other. Now, this can be great. It means that I can have people who can reach out to me and say, hey, do you want to Zoom with my book club? And I can just check my calendar and check. And that's a way to chat with readers. And it means that a face-to-face thing is more easy. It means that, readers and writers can, interact a bit more, and that can be, very cool and, very, very innocent and fun. It does mean there can be a sense of entitlement. It's like you have people who somehow think nothing of, sliding into your DMs and asking you very personal questions because they feel like they know you because they read your Instagram posts. And, that can be a little bit like, okay, I don't know you, actually. I know you've read my books, but I don't know you. And that's not a question I feel comfortable answering. Thank you very much. So the accessibility is a two-edged sword. I think overall my experiences are much, much more positive than negative. But one negative one can have the ability to really kind of make you go, oh boy, this is not what I signed up for. I just wanted to write a book. So as far as book talk particularly, I'm not on TikTok. My husband has a lot to do with internet security. And I said, so should I be on TikTok? He absolutely drained his face white. And he was like, no, you should not. And I was just like, okay, good. I didn't want to learn another form of social media anyway. So that's fine. So I'm not on TikTok, but we are aware, of course, that book talk is huge. But the thing is the thing that that I think people are realizing and publishers are realizing is that there doesn't seem to be a way to harness it in any particular way. I mean, most of the writers I know who are on TikTok, if they are good at it and they enjoy it, then they tend to get more views and maybe they get some traction from it. Because the thing with TikTok is it takes a lot of time. And unless you're really enjoying it, you're not going to, go big with any of your reels or whatever, because you really do need to enjoy it to do it and do it well. Or at least that's what I'm hearing from my friends. And even publishers, say it's like when something becomes this huge sensation on Book Talk, there's just no explanation for why. I mean, like at the beginning, people were saying, well, couldn't you just do what Colleen Hoover does? It's like, I would love to do what Colleen Hoover does, but even Colleen Hoover has said, I have no idea why my stuff blew up on TikTok. It wasn't anything that I did. It just happened. Madeline Miller had the same thing happen, with A Song of Achilles became this huge Book Talk sensation, like everybody crying about it. And like that book had already been out for a couple of years. It wasn't anything that she did. It was just something that happened. So Book Talk seems to be its own beast, and there doesn't seem to be any way to harness the beast in particular. So I tend to think I'm not going to try, and I just, we're going to write the books, and having a Book Talk sensation would be great, but there doesn't seem to be any way to make it happen except just that it happens organically.
Yeah, I love that. We're not on TikTok either for all of the reasons that you just mentioned. And I think you really you were spot on in saying that you don't know where it's going or who's going to blow up. And a lot of older books have blown up, which is really nice actually for the author, right? To have written a book years ago and have it blow up on something like TikTok. So Ashley actually has another question here. Just to reiterate, everybody, if you did want to ask a question live, then please feel free. You just need to raise your hand and I will unmute you, or you can put your questions in the chat window. Ashley wants to know what you like to read when you're not researching.
Oh goodness, I read everything. I will read anything if it's a good story. Honestly, I like a good historical romance when I want something light and mood lifting. I love a really juicy sci-fi or space opera. I read a lot of historical fiction, of course. I like a good mystery. It's like I will pretty much read it all. I am very much a mood reader, so it'll depend very much what I'm in the mood for. Some of the books I've read recently, Good Dual Timeline, By Any Other Name by Jodi Picoult, about a woman who maybe possibly, well, she was the first published female poet in Elizabethan England, and also possibly may have contributed to Shakespeare's plays. At least that's the fun thing that the book premises. I just read The Book Eaters, which is sort of fantasy world / a little bit of horror. And that was by Soon-Yi Young, I think, and that was fantastic. Probably making my year-end top 10 list. I have the new James S.A. Corey space opera bought, which I'm planning to dig into. I am a continuing reader of the Donna Leon Inspector Brunetti series because they're all set in Venice. And anytime I want to escape and, go have a little Italian vacation, I go off to, eat fabulous meals with Inspector Brunetti as he wanders around his city, asking questions of suspects until he figures out who done it. So all kinds of things. Right now I read a lot of ARCs too, because I get a lot for cover quotes. I'm currently reading the Saint Laurent Muse by C.W. Gortner, which is the fashion world of Paris in the 1970s, very all, Andy Warhol and nightclubs and cocaine and all this, very glitzy, wild world. And it's a lot of fun.
Just to kind of take this one step further, are there any books that actually inspire you or that any authors that you return to because they're very inspiring?
Some of the ones that really inspired me getting started, Bernard Cornwell, I adore. Nobody writes more exciting, blood and battle historical fiction. It's great. I love Eva Ibbotson, one of the best authors of historical / historical romance around. Her writing is just so exquisite, so next level. And she's such a wordsmith. And Judith Merkel Riley, I also adore. She wrote historical fiction that wasn't just, vivid and beautifully researched, but was funny and usually featured, women who are just trying to, carve out a life for themselves in some way. And, that's so hard sometimes, but, they managed to do it with a lot of humor and a lot of exasperation and a lot of skill. And she really taught me that historical fiction could be fun and it could be funny, because sometimes this is a genre that takes itself deadly seriously. So I always appreciate when a historical novel can make me laugh.
That's a good point. And I think that I would love to know how you balance sort of historical accuracy with the need for creative storytelling. Is there a line that you've ever found very difficult to draw?
Well, it's always a fine line, because your job as a novelist is that you do first and foremost need to tell an entertaining story. And so entertaining the reader, is absolutely, you need to keep that in mind. But, sometimes the history, can be inconvenient for your story. And then you have to figure out, do you maybe change something, or do you just try to replot so that you can accommodate the historical facts? Now, if it's a very small thing that you would need to change, I'm okay with changing that, especially if you mention it in the historical afterward. It's like, this event actually, took place in this year instead of this year. But if that event is something like the invasion of Normandy, no, you cannot change that event because that's too big. It's one of those historical signposts that is too big to shift. You're going to have to shift your story around it. So it generally becomes, you can change small things in the service of the story, but big stuff you can't change, and you're going to have your story accommodate that, because historical readers are smart, and they know a lot, and they want to have stories that are accurate as much as possible. So it is always a balancing act with every historical fiction novelist, and it's certainly one that we all keep in mind.
Fair enough. All right, well, we have a couple more questions just to wrap up. And I definitely want to ask you what you're working on next, if you're allowed to talk about it.
Sure. Do you want me to talk about that first?
No, let me ask you one more question.
Sure.
So I have so many, I don't know which one to end on.
We got a little bit of time, so I can try to keep my answers short if you want to get through a few.
Okay, that would be great. Okay, this one specifically is interesting. Research plays a huge role in historical fiction. What's the most surprising discovery you've made while researching one of your books? If not to put you on the spot too much.
Sometimes it can be the sensation that it almost feels like the history is leading you to discover it, and that can be very cool. I remember the fun thing that happened with the Alice Network, that I have a very good friend whose family is from that region of France that the Alice Network was operating from, at least family on her mother's side. And she was, as a native French and German speaker, helping me with a lot of, helping me translate a few things. And so doing that inspired her to go into some of her family archives, and they found out during the writing of the Alice Network that her, I think, great aunt and great uncle had been involved with the original Alice Network and knew the original Louise de Bettigny, and they had some letters from the family that proved it, and that actually proved some of the things that I had just conjectured probably happened actually happened. And that was one of those things. It was so astounding that, like, literally the research led to something real and to something new. And with the permission of the family, they let me reproduce some of the letters, I think, in the back of the Alice Network, and also let me put her great aunts and her great uncle in the book as very minor characters, by name. But I never had anything like that happen before, and that was astounding to me. I really loved that.
That's super cool. Sorry, I have a gecko going off in the background. Many of your novels touch on war, espionage, and courage under fire. What challenges do you face in keeping these elements fresh and engaging for each story?
Well, I think it's the realization that, there's many different kinds of bravery, and every fight is different. I mean, I remember thinking that, when I was writing about, the women of the Alice Network, they were spies. The danger to them was arrest and prison and execution. And but it was also a very clandestine kind of work. It involves a lot of very boring sitting and listening, keeping your cover, a lot of, it's not, charging around with a gun like James Bond. That's not what real espionage is. Then when I got to, the women in the Huntress, who were, the night bombers, that is the danger for them, is that they're going up every night in these planes made of plywood and canvas, and that they might at any point during one of the night's bombing runs get shot. So that's the danger for them. It's a much more concrete physical danger every night from bullets going through your body. Then when I wrote the Rose Code, that fight was purely intellectual and mental and emotional, because it was women who were in not physically in danger, but their fight was in the arena of the mind, but that took its own toll in a very different way. So I think what it comes down to is like not lumping women's fights in the past into a similar umbrella, but figuring out how each fight is different, as in the arena that she's working in, who the woman herself is. And that's the way, at least I try to keep it fresh, and I try to make sure that I don't end up writing the same book twice. It's like I wrote one book about, female spies in France. And if I was to write another book about female spies in France, it would have to be a very different kind of fight, or else I end up with a book that feels too similar to the Alice Network. So I try to pick, different routes for different books and try to figure out how each one is going to be different from each other.
With such strong female characters, I was wondering, often when we are interviewing authors, they really get upset when they finish their books and they're ready to move on to the next one, because they're putting to bed these characters that have lived so fiercely in their heads. I wonder if you experience anything like that.
It is a little wistful at the end when you're like, I'm not going to write anything more that's new about this person, probably. Although I will say, it's like they keep on living in my head very much. I mean, I always know, exactly how my characters go on after the last page of my book. It's like I know how the rest of their life works out. If they have kids, if they don't have kids, if they get married, if they don't get married. It's like I know all of that. So that they keep on living in my head, and that's fun. And sometimes I can revisit, because I do very much like doing crossover cameos in my books of the various characters. I mean, Eve from the Alice Network turns up as a cameo in The Huntress. Ian from The Huntress turns up as a cameo in The Rose Code. Beth from The Rose Code turns up as a cameo in The Briar Club. There's at least a relationship cameo that crosses over from the Diamond Eye to the Huntress. So so this sometimes does let me revisit old characters, which I always do enjoy doing, which is one of the reasons I like doing cameos in the first place.
I think that your readers would really enjoy that as well. Going back to social media, I love to ask authors if they read their reviews online.
Not really. I mean, I do sometimes I'll read the positive ones if I see them, like if I'm tagged. But I'm actually very good now. If I'm tagged in a review and it looks like it's starting to look like it's a negative one, I just close it out and I keep going. And the reason for that being is that most writers, you can read 99 great reviews and one bad review, and the bad review is the one that rattles around in your head. And the thing is that also, and it's a hard lesson for any writer to read, is that reviews aren't really for us. Reviews are for other readers. So it does not do any good to read that stuff and let it rattle around in your head, because it'll probably just knock your confidence a bit, maybe knock you off your game a little. And I know it's like we should just have thicker skins, but it's hard. It is hard. And the thing is that when those reviews are coming across, your book's already out. You can't do anything about it. You can't change it now. Like, the time for feedback for a writer is when you're still you still have the power to change things and make your book better. So I read my feedback then. That's when, and I read my feedback from my editor, from my critique partners, from group of beta readers, from sensitivity readers. These are the people whose they send me reviews and they give me feedback, and that's when I'm listening very, very carefully, because I'm still in a position to be able to actually make changes. But once the book is out, I can't really do anything about it. So reading a review that says, well, the first 50 pages really dragged, well, I'm sorry, but I can't do anything about those first 50 pages now. So I'm just going to skip that review and not have that rattle around in my head and just keep going on about my day.
I'm glad I asked that, because I feel like your advice specifically is really pertinent to maybe new writers, because you're completely right. There's nothing to be done. And I love that you said that the reviews are for other writers or other readers as opposed to the author themselves.
Although I do think this is one way in which social media is not helpful. It's like, it can be lovely if people tag you in a nice review, but it's like better not to tag it all than, but like don't tag in a negative review. Like when
Yeah.
you're tagging an author in a review that says how much you hated the book, I mean that's just bad manners. I'm sorry.
I feel like that can't happen too much. You'd
Oh,
think
it
that there
does.
would be.
It does
Oh, wow.
quite a bit. And every writer I know is baffled by that. It's like, why?
Yeah.
I mean, if you hated the book, that's fine. I mean, I'm not requiring you to like it or to lie or
Yeah.
to. You don't have to like it. That's totally fine that you didn't. But why did you need to involve me in this discussion? I don't need to be here for that.
Yeah, it's fair. It's a fair question. Yeah, okay, Kate, to finish up, please do tell us what's coming out next.
Next, I have a book I'm actually currently in the process of editing. It is going to be probably coming out February or March of 2026. And right now it has the title of The Astral Library. It's something a little different for me. It is a little bit less straight historical fiction and more magic realism, a little touch of fantasy. And it is my love letter to book lovers, libraries, librarians, and anybody who has ever wished secretly that they could live out a new life in a book.
Oh, I love that. That sounds great. Sorry, did you say when it was going to be published?
No publication date set yet, but it's probably going to be, I'm guessing, February, March, April, somewhere thereabouts of 2026.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We're a little out over a year out. I couldn't get it turned in this year. There was a lot going on this year.
All right. Okay, well, very excitingly, we have 3 copies of Kate's book, The Briar Club, to give away. So to enter this giveaway, please, all you need to do is send us an email. And Valerie, can you pop our email address in the chat window there? And just let us know what your favorite Kate Quinn novel is and why. And then we'll choose just at random 3 winners. You'll be emailed tomorrow to let you know if you've won, and we'll get those in the mail to you. Thank you, Kate. Amazing. Again, I love talking to you. Also, you've inspired me. I remember I talked to you last time and you told me it was during the pandemic, and you told me that you had a shirt that you just put on anytime you were doing a Zoom interview, and then you didn't have to change all your clothes. So I
Yeah,
have
this shrug literally just hangs on a hanger on the back of my office door, and it goes on right before the book club starts.
I have
It's the
absolutely
super thing. Like
adopted that.
underneath this is like it's yoga pants with dog hair on them. You just can't see that part.
Anyways, thank you so much for joining us, and we can't wait to see what's next for you. You're one of our favorite authors, and thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thank you so much for reading and for having me join you, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of your weekend.
All right.